That's a difficult area to deal with within the workforce development system. And just to answer your quick question, the unemployment rate among 16 to 24-year-old minority youth in New York State is 20.1%. So I was close. The issue of folks who are looking for upgrades of their skills, that I'll be honest, that's an area that I don't think the workforce development system and federal funding has really supported very well over the years. We tend to be focused more on folks who aren't in the workforce already, folks who are looking to enter jobs. We have used some small amounts of funding over the last couple of years that we had available at the Department of Labor, a couple of $1 million, $6 million in the consolidated funding application that allowed businesses to apply for skills upgrading. So for folks who are in the workforce, they had to demonstrate that without the skills upgrading, the folks were in danger of layoff or the business was in danger of closing. So it wasn't a generic opening to anybody who just wanted to have their skills raised, but rather it was a business that would come forward and say, I need to train my workers on a new tool or technique in order to keep the business going.
Well, you know, I raise this issue because, as you know, a lot of the new jobs that are being created in our new economy are based on knowledge. And you mentioned earlier, community colleges, SUNY and even CUNY are coming up with CT courseworks that will allow people to get access to it. Oftentimes, those are free opportunities, but you have to be unemployed for a significant period of time. Well, if you've been working, you know, at McDonald's for the last 2 years and maybe even as a CNN on the rest of the time, you really need to access to that new job. But you can't get it because you are employed, but I would say underemployed. And so I really think that there needs to be some real strategic think around how do we fix that for people, because otherwise, what's the good, the real reality in creating a knowledge-based economy and leaving so many of your constituents out? Because they cannot quit a job in order to become unemployed, in order to be eligible for the training that gets them into the knowledge-based economy. I'd appreciate a look at that one.
We'd love to talk to you about that, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Kruger.
Hi, thank you. Just jumping back into the minimum wage controversy. And you've answered quite a number of questions already. So, and in answering the questions, you've actually raised more questions about, I think that specifically your department, and not tonight necessarily in your notes, but can help us all better understand the pros, the potential negatives, and the realities of choosing to increase the minimum wage. So you spoke about the fact that when we raise the minimum wage, it will actually increase the buying power of workers who then go and spend more money in their local economy, increasing sales tax revenue, increasing other income revenue streams for local governments. I think you also referenced that when we raise the minimum wage, we actually move people out of poverty, and that has all kinds of economic wins for the state as well, including lower use of Medicaid and other public benefits, certainly lower use of emergency service benefits, that also need to be factored into sort of the pros and cons charts. We all, well, I don't know about all of us, but some of us sat through a earlier hearing today where we heard an immense amount of testimony from health and mental health and human service contractors saying they support the increased minimum wage, but the reality is their budgets are disproportionately, even in some cases, almost 100% state contracts, almost all for workers, and if we raise their mandatory salaries, we need to come up with the money. So there was at least one commissioner who said there are people in the state working on evaluating what those numbers mean and would cost. So I'm hoping that you might be able to bring back to all of us, or ask whomever is the better person, the kind of documentation to justify this, because I actually think when we have the facts from the research and the numbers for the state, sure, we'll see some here's not so great, but we'll see that the pros outnumber the negatives. But I can guarantee we just, even the few of us here on this panel tonight, clearly are in significant disagreement about our position on it, and I do think that more data would be helpful. So I'm hoping that sometime soon you and the administration can provide some of that information, including who are the winners or the most significantly impacted, because I suspect what we'll see, because it's been found in other states, it's single mothers who have the win, and other exceptionally low-income people who are disproportionately users of government services. It's certain sectors of the economy, which raises the question about contractors for health, human services, child care, et cetera, being disproportionately impacted, but with a disproportionate possible win for communities if they're seeing the increase. I guess one more question. We are constantly told this could have a very negative impact on businesses and their economic streams. But I believe I read somewhere recently that the growth rate of profits for New York State businesses had way outpaced any increase in wages being paid, and that there was data over the last 5 to 10 years in New York State confirming that when you look at profits of businesses and how that money's being spent, what we're seeing is wage rates becoming a lower and lower percentage, or total wage cost, becoming a lower and lower percentage of the business's bottom line cost. So I also think that is relevant for the kind of analysis we as legislators are being asked to do, and that kind of information would be helpful. Can I ask you to follow up on those kinds of questions?
Yes, we will certainly do our best.
Great, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. In your testimony, you talked about the 96 career centers helping more than 260,000 people find a job in the last year. That's great. Yesterday, I had a bit of a question answer or push and pull discussion with the Economic Development Commissioner, because he was talking about having created or retained 200,000 jobs, except the numbers from audit showed more like 15,000 jobs. So I'm just curious, how does every state agency actually add this all up? How do you confirm that what you were doing with your career centers created 260,000 jobs? Because for the record, if you're doing that on whatever amount of money you have, I would like to cut a bunch of other things and give you more money because you're having a better success rate.
Our staff is terrific, as I've said
Clearly.
many times. Our staff is really terrific. And I want to be careful in how I say this. At the Department of Labor, we don't create jobs. What we are reporting is that folks who come into our career centers for help, we are able to place into jobs that are available out there in the state of New York. So we take advantage of the great projects that are underway around the state, the expansion of business that we see underway around the state. We have tremendous relationships with ESD, with our friends in economic development, Commissioner Zemsky and his staff, to know where the businesses are that are growing. And we get job orders from them, and we talk to those businesses and say, we can get you the people who are qualified for those jobs. As I said in my testimony, we've got 770,000 plus new jobs in the state over the last couple of years. So that's the pool that we're using, right? That's where we're playing. That's the field we're playing in. We know these exist because we review wage records. So we know somebody got a job because we see them showing up in a wage record later on, that they are employed and getting a paycheck.
So in continuing my devil's in the detail questions, because you're right, you never said you created jobs, you helped people find the jobs that matchmake. If the state of New York didn't have a Department of Labor with career centers, would those 260,000 jobs have remained unfilled in this last year?
I think a number of them would remain unfilled. I think businesses would have a hard time finding them. I'm sure you've all heard from the businesses in your community, one of the difficult things that businesses are having, one of the difficult times they're having now, is finding the right people to fit the jobs that they have. Our folks are really expert at doing the analysis of people's skill sets, determining what their strengths are, determining areas that we need to work on a little bit with them. We're able to do that, get them into the sort of light touch training necessary to get them ready. And we're able to provide some incentives to business like the Urban Youth Tax Credit as an example on the job training. So yes, I do think a lot of those jobs would go unfilled, but not for the work of our staff out there.
And just finally, of your budget, what amount goes to having the 96 career centers, operating them? Do you know?
What amount goes to 96? That is it's a real mix of different funding sources. So we get in about $170 million, as I said, in Workforce Investment Act or Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act funding. 85% of that goes out to the local areas. All of the 96 career centers that we have around the state are partnerships between us and the local areas. So a large proportion of that 85% of $170 million, $135 million or so is going to support the operations of those career centers. Probably virtually all of it, right? Maybe $100 million of it goes to support that. In addition, we use funding that we get for staffing through Wagner Pizer, for example, which is another $40 million a year. That is staff that's out there in the career center, so that goes as well. So it's really the bulk of what we do is going to support the operations of the career centers and then under the job training programs and things of that nature.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you for being here, and I know Senator Martins, I think he has some follow-up questions, is that right? But okay, well, I'll let you go, and then I'll finish up, I guess.
Thank you. A comment and then a question. The comment is that to clarify your point made about the Puget Sound article, I think you and I would both agree, and everyone here would agree as well, that the minimum wage in Seattle right now is not $15, right?
Correct.
And so we're not necessarily discussing the same issue. And so the point that was made isn't really on point since they're still at $10.50 an hour. But I will ask one question. You know, as I've often been reminded that the true minimum wage is zero when someone loses a job. And we've talked about both sides of the equation, how we have to look at this issue from both sides of the equation. And that truly, you know, as policymakers, that's our task. We have to look at the benefit to a worker and our commitment to dealing with income inequality and to dealing with the realities of low-wage workers, while at the same time balancing it against the very real concerns that we hear in our districts, in our downtowns, from small businesses, that this is going to be an existential threat to them. Not an inconvenience, but an existential threat. And the reminder that that $15.7 billion that we keep talking about as being an infusion in the economy is already in the economy. All we're deciding is who gets it, because what we're doing is taking it away from that small business owner that employs a couple of employees and giving it to somebody else. That $15.7 billion did not come out of nowhere. It wasn't created. It isn't economic advancement or new monies that were created, but actually a taking from one group and giving to another. And both are capable of spending it in the economy. So I would just ask to reiterate the point that was made by Senator Kruger, that you give us the materials that we need to take a look at in order to substantiate those numbers. And I would ask that when you do that, that you do it in a way that doesn't just give us information that was prepared by the administration, by the Division of Budget, by the Department of Labor, or by the executive, but find us credible information that we can actually follow, because what we're hearing in our communities is significantly different than what we're hearing in this proposal, and those facts matter. And I would just remind you that there's no one in the executive branch that cares as much or more than the people in the legislature, than the people here on this dais about the working poor in New York State, that are committed to the working poor and to increasing and helping working poor in New York State. And so give us that information. Allow us the opportunity to work with you in terms of crafting a proper minimum wage, and one that isn't predicated simply on statements from a pulpit or statements from a podium. And I'll just end with this. When we talk about winners and losers when it comes to minimum wage and an increase to $15 an hour, I would add as winners the federal government that will receive the tax from workers in New York State that currently wouldn't have to pay that tax, but a full third of that increase is going to go to the federal government in the terms of tax and not going to remain in the hands of those people who we're trying to help. So let's work together and see how we solve this issue. Thank you. Thank you very much for the indulgence.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Funke.
Just a quick follow-up. It seems to me that there's a distinct difference between somebody who is getting his or her first job and learning how to show up on time and be a committed employee, and somebody who's 21 years of age who has graduated from college and may not find a job and has student loans to pay back, or somebody who is over the age of 21 and has a family, and so on and so forth. There's a distinct difference to me between what he or she or that age category may be entitled to be paid. Has the Department of Labor, as the executive, has anybody ever considered the differences in age with regard to minimum wage and what the impact may or may not be?
Yes. In fact, we have some data, and I'm going to see if I can find it here. So if we look in New York City at the people who currently make less than $15 an hour, 80% are 25 years or older. Outside of New York City, it's a 70% who are 25 or older. So there is this view that this is low-wage workers are always very young people. It's not. It's working mothers. 55% outside of New York City are female. 54% in New York City are female. So there are age quartiles that are out there and we can provide that detailed information as well. But it isn't the picture that folks always have. I think colloquially, a lot of folks think that people at the low end of the wage scale are kids. They're not. They're often older, starting their families, or have established families and trying to sustain the families.
Are you including tipped workers in those stats?
I'd have to go back and look at the data source. I don't know the answer to that. I believe we would be, because this is from the U.S. Department of Labor, I think, and the American Community Survey, but I'd have to go back and look at the data source.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and I've been listening very carefully. You have said that you were a bit dismissive, I thought, of the Farm Bureau's concerns about farming and agriculture. And I don't believe there has been any kind of study of what the impact actually would be on agriculture in New York State, is there? Is there any data? Because, as you know, in your role, farmers are paid for a commodity, which means that they produce a product and they are told what they get in payment for that product, and they can't control. It's not like a pizzeria or a sub shop or, a retail store where they can just increase costs to the consumers and have this inflationary effect to pay for their employees' wages. And so as a result of that, there are real concerns because, Assemblyman Oaks talked about the apple industry, for example. We compete with many other states. Washington State is a huge one as far as our apple products. And I know how proud the governor's been of the growth in the agricultural industry over the past several years. So, you know, I would think that that would be something taken into consideration, but what you're telling me is that there has been no study or real information out there about what the actual impact would be on agriculture.
And if I appear dismissive about the agricultural industry, I certainly did not mean to give that impression at all. I think what I was trying to say was I didn't want to put words in the mouth of Dean Norton, who had talked about the federal minimum wage, and so I was kind of dismissive of that. He had used some words, but I didn't want to say that is what he was proposing. So that's what I was trying to get at there. And absolutely, as you said, the governor has focused like a laser on growth in the agricultural industry in this state, from things like Taste New York, all of the marketing programs that are out there, the beer and wine summits, the yogurt summits, all of that sort of stuff. And we've seen terrific growth in the agricultural industry. I think Commissioner Ball was asked the same question at his testimony last week, and he talked about the both sides of the ledger. What are we doing to try to help assist in the growth of the agriculture industry? And we talked about some of the other proposals that he is much more expert than I am in things that are intended to assist the agricultural industry to lower property taxes and the changes in throughway tolls and things of that nature. The one sort of area that I would add when you think about both sides of the ledger, because of the terrific marketing efforts that are underway, as we put more money into local economies, I really do believe, and I don't think it's Pollyannish to say it, I really do believe that you will see farmers, growers be able to sell more of their products in the local economy. Low-wage workers aren't low-wage families, aren't often the folks who are buying fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, I'm not saying that's a miracle or a panacea, but I think we'll help expand markets because of that additional income in those communities, as well as we do better marketing of those.
And I understand that, and I would point out to you that, and that's great, and that's what we want, and people want fresh, safe, and local as far as their food supply goes, but would point out to you, there's a Commerce Clause in the Constitution, and so we are competing. You could go to Price Chopper down the street right now, and you will find produce from countries all over the world, other states, and so I just want to draw that to your attention. And John F. Kennedy said, and this is one of my favorite quotes because I grew up on a farm, but so I can understand this, the American farmer is the only man in our economy who buys everything he buys at retail, sells everything he sells at wholesale, and he pays the freight both ways. So, we want to keep that in mind as we work to grow the agricultural industry in New York State. And I did want to ask, though, because, we heard from OPWDD earlier today, and there really wasn't any answer on how much an increase in the minimum wage would impact, for example, nonprofit agencies that take care of people with disabilities, and how are they going to pay for those increased costs, because there's a finite amount of money in a lot of the service providers that we have. And some of those, it's in healthcare, it's in human services, direct care workers, and so on. So there's an impact in the private sector. There's an impact on nonprofit providers. And also there's an impact on public sector employees. And I'll use just one example. I've talked to many nursing homes, and they already are struggling in so many ways in order to take care of our most frail elderly in the state. And again, finite amount of money and provided as reimbursement for those services. We have nursing homes around the state that are operated by county governments. And already county governments are saying we're having a difficult time keeping those nursing homes operating. And frankly, some are considering getting out of the nursing home business altogether. And I've had private operators tell me that I will have to close if this goes through. So I guess the answer is, if the minimum wage goes up, somehow the payment to those providers has to go up. And I was wondering if there's been any kind of studies, and I don't think there has been, but maybe you could answer that for us, if there's any kind of studies that show how much it will cost to be able to keep those facilities operating because they provide essential, critical, necessary services to the people of New York State.
That is not something that we've done at the Department of Labor. I know the Division of the Budget has been asked this question, or I know it's come up in numerous budget hearings, I should say, and my understanding is there have been specific requests now to the Division of the Budget to take a look at this in more detail and how that ramp up will impact over the next couple of years. There are some intangibles may not be the best way to put it, but there are some positive impacts that always comes along with increases in wages, whether it's in the not-for-profit sector or in the private sector as well. And I know you would know this from your visits to nursing homes and things like that. My mother spent the last 7 years of her life in a nursing home local, and I live locally, so I was able to visit a lot. And you learn a couple of things. I think we all know the folks who are therapy aides in nursing homes deserve to get paid more just because of the hard work and the important work that they do, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. But one thing I noticed, and I know there are statistics out there, but I experienced it myself over the 6 or 7 years that I was visiting, was the different faces all the time. They didn't keep staff. Lower paid staff don't stay, and we know nursing homes and lots of not-for-profit organizations have very high turnover rates. I saw a reference in an article once, and so I don't want to cite it, but it was 50% or something in nursing homes, a turnover rate at the aide level. So that's one issue that nursing homes will find a little bit of relief from. As wages go up, I think you won't have quite the same level of turnover. We know turnover costs a lot. Every time you replace an employee, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 in training, lost productivity and all that. I guess it's my long way around, Senator. Any analysis also has to think about some of those issues as well, and we would be happy to try to take a look at that.
I agree with that, and I think direct care workers more than deserve to have higher wages. And I don't know if across the board raising the minimum wage addresses the issue that you're referencing, however, because oftentimes people, if they have a choice between standing at a cash register or changing dirty diapers on an adult who is very ill for the same amount of money, they'll probably choose, the less difficult job. So I'm concerned about that. But I believe very strongly that our workers and facilities deserve to have higher wages. There's no doubt about it. The question is, how do you pay for it? And we don't want people to lose jobs, and we want to keep our facilities open, whether it's hospitals, whether it's nursing homes, and so on. So what we're asking for, and we're hoping that, Senator Kruger brought it up, Senator Martins brought it up, our colleagues brought it up, what we're hoping for is a little bit more data. I think everybody wants our people, our families to have good paying jobs in the state. That's not the question. We support that. But the question is, we need to fully understand what the impact is of raising the minimum wage and making sure that it doesn't have a negative impact. And so we would ask you, ask the other commissioners, to give us more information. And that would be most helpful as we go through this deliberative process.
Absolutely. So
thank you. Anyone else? Okay, very good. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Francine, come on down.